Chad, you were the first person to ever bring to my attention this alleged group, the Collins Elite. And you had mentioned that it was a group that was started to answer some of the hard questions for the government about a gate being ripped open and entities pouring through. Briefly tell me about this.
This started with a guy by the name of Jack Parsons of JPL and also of L. Ron Hubbard, the creator of Scientology. They were performing the Aleister Crowley a la mantra working, but they had changed it and they were doing something called the Babylon working ritual. During this ritual, they ripped a hole in space-time that neither one of them was able to close. And before they ever even had a chance, Jack Parsons actually blew himself up. So now there's no way of actually closing it because whoever opens it has to be the one who closes it.
So this group comes into play because all of these UFO sightings, alien discussions are now taking place because of something that took place through the ritual. The ritual opens up this gate, portal opens up, all this activity gets spun, and now the government is trying to get answers to the questions that everybody's asking.
Yes. And we've actually got the documents from back in the day, all the way traced back to 1947, FBI document 6751. And at that time, they already knew these things were interdimensional, that they were coming from another dimension. They used terminology like the ethereal plane and even referenced things like the lokas, which is an esoteric and occult phrase.
You had mentioned this idea of a particular man, Murnau, that he made some profound statements after coming to Christ. And he was an occultist that was very high level. What can you tell me about this guy and what he brought to the table?
Roger Morneau was actually a very wealthy Canadian man. He was part of the upper aristocrat elites. They brought him in. He had started off going to seances with his wife, and eventually one of his wealthy friends pulled him aside and said, look, you're dealing with these demons. He said, you're basically dealing with the bottom of the barrel. He goes, if I want real power, he goes, I go directly to the source. He said, we worship spirits. We worship Lucifer and his fallen angels, and they're just as beautiful as the day that they were cast out of heaven. And our master was misunderstood. That's another thing that really, whenever I was watching the interviews that he gave about his book, A Trip into the Supernatural, he actually refers to Lucifer. That's what they refer to Lucifer as, the master.
This is going right back to what we blew open in the Hollow Earth.
Exactly.
With Admiral Byrd speaking of this inner earth entity, the master. And as we believed through our research that the master was in fact Lucifer inside the earth, correlating with what we find out in the book of Job and other passages about things going on inside the earth. These occultists are communicating with the bottom feeders, the demons, and he's making the point that there are higher entities that his group was communicating with. This goes back to what Aleister Crowley made mention of, is that today they're masquerading as one thing, tomorrow they're going to masquerade as something else.
Yeah, you're speaking of the quote that Aleister Crowley made where he said, today they call them angels and demons, tomorrow they will call them something else. And he was direct contact with the Augustus Council of the Nine. And that ties right in with the Council of the Nine, that a lot of the upper echelon here in the United States, like the DuPonts and so on, they were channeling these beings called the Council of the Nine.
Right. The last thing I need us to hit on here is Greg Renrich. There's a lot of mystique surrounding this guy because of the positions that he held in these top secret government organizations. What can you tell us about Greg Renrich?
Greg Renrich was a lieutenant colonel, but he held a very high level top secret clearance, one that very few people actually hold. Groom Lake, Area 51. He's been inside down in the underground levels of S4, as well as Dulce, New Mexico. He has witnessed the 10-foot giants and said that they told him and referred to themselves as the Nephilim, said that they were preparing for an intergalactic war with God, and they believed that they were going to win.
Is this the gentleman who said that in these deep underground military bases, that you're not even allowed to use the name Jesus as a cuss word?
That is correct. They made them sign an affidavit that said that not even in anger, even if they stubbed their toe, they were not allowed to use the name Jesus Christ in these underground tunnels.
Because the power in the name of Jesus, even if it's being used as a cuss word, when you're in the presence of these higher entities, it's going to create some type of a friction. So we're now dealing with another government official, if you want to use that terminology, a servant of the federal government, who was in the bases, deep underground, dealing with these alien entities that have already been deemed by other federal government projects to not be alien, but to be non-human, otherworld entities, interdimensional entities. And the Collins elite was trying to get answers to this years before. Am I understanding this correctly?
You're completely correct. And that was the whole sole purpose that the Collins elite that set them apart from Project Blue Book as well as MJ-12. They were tasked with getting to the bottom of this. What are they? Where are they coming from? What is their agenda? And their final rule on this was that these things were masquerading, they were nefarious, and that they were demonic in nature.
As I understand it, the shadowy organization known as the Collins Elite was born of military, government, scientific experts who really owe their origin of their group to one man named Jack Parsons. And when you start to dig into the name and the history of Jack Parsons, you realize why such a group was born into existence. You see, Jack Parsons was the founder of the Aerojet Corporation and intimately tied to NASA's Jet Propulsion Laboratories, so much so that they say that JPL stood for Jack Parsons Laboratory, not Jet Propulsion.
Right.
And so he was a renowned rocket scientist. So now how could a genius rocket scientist have anything to do? Why would a group of experts investigating the UFO phenomenon be born from Jack Parsons? Because Jack Parsons was a self-admitted occultist, and he was a student of Aleister Crowley. And Crowley himself had made Jack Parsons in charge of one of his Thelemic orders in 1942. So all manner of satanic strangeness was going on at his house in Pasadena, California. And so when other organizations started to investigate Jack Parsons, they quickly came to they started drawing some really diabolical, connecting some really diabolical dots.